Welcome to Instagram Live, talking about USC sustainability. My name is Dan Mazmanian, and I'm the chair of the Presidential Working Group on Sustainability in Education, Research, and Operations, which is across the entire university. And I'm a professor of policy in the Price School of Public Policy. And I'm delighted to have this opportunity to share with you the really interesting questions that I have already been received in anticipation of this chat. And I have 8 in front of me. I'm going to try and get through all 8 of them, but I have to confess, each one leads down its own path. But I'm going to do my best to cover them all, and hopefully they will resonate with all of those of you interested in what in the world is USC doing, what should we be doing, what might you be doing. So I'm going to try all that. But first, I want to start with the big question. And I'm going to just read it, and then I'm going to try and answer. It says, how do universities contribute to climate change, and why should they be responsible for fighting it? Really a very important question, because we are a university. We're a huge university. 2 major campuses, healthcare and University Park. You know, we've got about 60,000 students, faculty, staff. And I want you to know, first of all, if we did everything all of us decided to do to address climate change by reducing our carbon footprint, the effect on the globe would be infinitesimal. We are not doing this simply to reduce our own footprint. That's not what a university is about. We're doing this because we're an institution of learning, that we have a moral obligation, we have a professional obligation, we have an individual obligation. I feel it personally, I hope you do too, to think about the implications of not just climate change itself, which are very profound. We all know about climate change and heat events and fires and sea level rise, but what are the consequences for people? So our job is not only to understand the dynamics of climate change caused by the emissions of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which we are doing, but to address the questions of what do we do about it? What is the role of a university? In particular, what is USC's role in addressing this issue? And I want you to know the covering title of what we are doing in the Presidential Working Group, a group that was brought together by the president, our president, Carol Folt, nearly 20 months ago, following her, if you will, her first arrival at USC, was to make sustainability one of the cornerstones of her administration as president. Sustainability in terms of the educational experience for students, sustainability in terms of where we focus our research, sustainability in terms of how we walk the talk as a campus and as a community. So this is a major undertaking that is evolving. A bit about the committee: we've got 27 members who are from the faculty, from students, from diversity, equity, and inclusion, from research, from operations. The provost is ex officio. So it's a micro community of USC, and we have 5 working groups on issues such as education, research, engagement on campus and with our communities off campus. A critical issue that came up in one of the questions I'm going to loop back to. With diversity, equity, and inclusiveness. How does that fit together with sustainability? How do we deal with questions of equity and so forth? Another issue we're dealing with. And then the campus plan, which is what in fact are our ambitions to make USC a model of sustainability as a place, as a living university. So those are all very big questions. The reason we're doing it, as I want to return to where I began with the question, is we're not going to solve the problem ourselves. What we are doing is trying to model the best behavior for other universities, but basically for everybody on the globe. We're on one planet together, and it is our obligation to prepare students who are going to move into this world we're living in, much longer than I'm going to be here, and generations to follow, to bring into greater balance our natural systems and our human civilization and our systems. So the planet's going to be here long after climate change does whatever it's going to do. The question is, how are we going to manage through it? How are we going to find the least disruptive and harmful effects on people? So from the President's Working Group point of view, from President Folt's working view, the issue is not simply understanding climate change, but its social impacts and what do we do to educate ourselves, to help others prepare, but to walk the talk. So that's where we begin. So then the next question is, what are the university's main priorities concerning sustainability? Always ask that question. Well, one is, given what I just said, is to achieve carbon neutrality. That is to take down our own personal responsibility for generating greenhouse gases. That in operating the university, that in commuting to our campus in fossil fuel-driven vehicles, that in flying around the planet where fossil fuels are being emitted, that through the way, by the way, we choose what we eat, but more importantly, the life cycle of our food. And what do we mean by waste? What we procure and use, the life cycle of paper, the life cycle of plastic, the life cycle of anything. How we maintain our own campus. Does it, in fact, have a net contribution to a more sustainable ecosystem and social system? Or are we simply drawing in new resources? One of the issues, by the way, that's come up from students, mainly, by the way, from students over the last 2 years is our landscaping. You know, why aren't we drought resistant? Well, we are moving in that direction. But that's because sustainability is now the guiding principle into which we're thinking about landscaping, as opposed to some other aesthetic that we've had in the past. And the same thing with our commuting. I mean, USC actually has its own fleet of cars, and we're moving to zero emissions on those. And we have our own fleet of buses. We're moving to zero emission on those. But we also have the issue of why should we all be commuting so much? And why should we all be in our individual cars? So to what extent does public transportation or hybrid learning, online and in person, affect the campus? All these issues, they are being addressed today, but it's all new also. So we're emerging in this new arena. And so that's what USC is doing. And generally, now back to our priorities. There are two main priorities right now, maybe a third, that in fact are being manifest throughout. One I mentioned is carbon neutrality. The ambition is to be able to say that USC is a carbon neutral university by 2028. Our planning time horizon in the President's Working Group is near term, the next couple of years. What do we do now? What are we actually starting now? And then by 2028, what kind of goals have we achieved? And the commitment right now, at least in concept, because this is a recommendation to the president that's forthcoming, is that by 2028, we can say USC is carbon neutral. How we get there? A variety of answers to that. Part of it is what we call through demand side management, reducing our own energy needs. Part of it is through bringing in renewable energy rather than fossil fuel generated energy. And that's being done very much in partnership with the city of Los Angeles because we get our electricity through the Department of Water and Power. Part of it is through dramatically reducing the need for natural gas for heating and boilers and warming our buildings and so forth. Part of that's going to be through renovation, electrification of areas where we need heat. And it may be partly due to what's being called clean gas, which is a technology that does exist. That is, it doesn't result in fossil fuel burning, but that's in the technology development stage, but that may be coming also. So one of our goals is, what do we do to make USC a carbon neutral university? 2 is zero waste. Now, what does zero waste mean? Well, it really means that when we think about what we procure, what we use, what we build, that the results of that, be it having a lunch, be it buying paper, buying equipment, that they don't end up in landfills. Don't end up in landfills. They don't end up being burned, then in turn, like plastics are currently burned someplace to create energy, they don't be burned and create more fossil fuels. So it's a life cycle analysis. So So zero waste doesn't simply mean what you put in the waste can. Although, by the way, when you return to campus, for those of you who are students and faculty and staff, come fall, you'll find we now have 4 bins for various of composting and dry waste and wet waste and so forth. That's new at USC. It's being put around the campus while we are off campus. I know we're all online right now. So we have these programs that are beginning. So that's if you started with just carbon neutrality and zero waste, you realize you're affecting an enormous range of things on campus in terms of our own behavior, in terms of our technology, in terms of our driving, in terms of our consumption. So they're percolating down to all these areas in the university that make a difference. And part of that involves technology, and part of it involves our responsibilities, which comes later in my questions, to be more conscientious about how we in fact purchase and dispose of materials ourselves. I've talked to the in the arts community. They tell me about all the materials that don't need to be thrown away because they can be reused, and just doing artwork. We talk about people in Price School where I'm at, and the staff of Price School have become very conscientious about both the purchasing issue and the recycling issue. So that when you're saying what are we doing, it's very broad. There is an element to that I want to loop back to what I called at the beginning, social impacts. Because what do we mean by social impacts? Well, we mean what in fact are the consequences of not only climate change itself, but how we adapt on people. Well, who are the people? They're us. And at USC, they're our neighbors and the community of Los Angeles we live in. Now, it's much broader, of course, social impacts around the planet. But what USC is about to say and embrace, which is we need to think of solutions that not only reduce our carbon footprint, but in fact help those in our community reduce theirs, because we have wherewithal they do not. It's a matter of wealth in part. We know that we live in an area of enormous a community with enormous needs in terms of wealth and physical health well-being. So how can we help them adapt while we adapt in a way that it is co-benefit? How do we work with them so that we can say we reduced our footprint, but we also helped our community reduce its footprint? And USC will claim it. We're doing it. That's leading to our carbon neutrality. If we can help people in our, we have a good neighbors community around us to find where we help in a lot of ways. If we can help those good neighbors community, individuals, homes, businesses reduce their footprint, the net effect on the planet is the same as if we did it right on campus, because we're talking about carbon emissions, which is global. So if we can help others, we can claim this is what USC is doing for itself by helping and working with its community around it. So that's equity and justice, the issues brought up constantly in this conversation. I want to assure you the President's Working Group has titled what we're saying is our recommendation very self-consciously. It's sustainability and equity and justice social impacts. We're talking about we don't want one without the other. That isn't what we should be doing. And through research and through education, coming to those through areas, there are a lot of ways of doing that if we're willing to embrace them and think about them. And there's always going to be a cost factor in whatever we do. But let's say it costs a little bit more to help a neighbor reduce his or her impact, either through better energy consumption, better transportation options, better food and dietary behavior options. And it costs a little bit more than maybe it would cost USC to reduce its carbon offset by purchasing offsets in a place like the Amazon. The co-benefits, think about co-benefits. The co-benefits to doing good while you're doing well right in your own community are overwhelming. So that's the kind of commitment USC is moving toward. And it's voiced by our president, but she has asked the President's Working Group to, okay, now how do we get there? What are the steps we need to take, and some very broad thematically? For instance, one of the recommendations of the President's Working Group is that all students at USC need to have an experience, learn about and have experience in sustainability and DEI through their educational experience. So the educational experience at USC, particularly as undergraduate, is a very, very important concern. And we just started this year. This is our first year at this. We already started this year. There's a half a dozen classes where we're piloting to infuse the message of sustainability into otherwise existing classes. Which classes? Someone asks. Well, the presidential working group in thinking about what sustainability needs to mean at USC, because it has many meetings, is it has to be understood through the lens of every discipline and field we teach. Not one. It's not just about the natural sciences, and it's not just about equity and justice. It's about everything we do: psychology, literature, economics, biology. Every discipline and field needs to think, what is it we do professionally today that if we thought about the need of climate change challenges to what we already do, how would we understand that in a way that contributes to solutions? So we are piloting with classes where faculty stepped forward last summer to roll out classes now, several in general education, but some others through Chemistry 1, through psychology, through a course of Asian ethics, through LA city and racial justice classes. It's not one. So we're challenging everyone at USC to say, we have to have a place in this conversation and we have to think about solutions. That's the education. And the faculty is soon to learn in the next couple of weeks. This pilot is going to be ramped up quite significantly for next year, where faculty will be invited to join workshops, to get support in developing a knowledge base, because let's say I'm Dan Mazmanian, I'm teaching in the Price School, and I'm teaching a course on policy implementation, which, by the way, I used to teach at Price. And I'm saying, well, how do I think about that in terms of sustainability? Well, the answer is, Dan, let's find a substantive expert who actually has been thinking about this issue already to work with you to pair up so you can modify your class, learn while teaching, and in fact, enhance yourself so now you become an expert, or at least you become quite familiar enough to continue teaching in a way that makes sense. That's what we're doing. That's called infusion classes. We're infusing sustainability in existing. We're going to be inviting faculty to develop new classes. We're going to be inviting faculty to develop actually new minors that are thematically focused. When I say thematically, energy, transportation, equity and justice in the community. That's a theme where there would be a minor developed that is interdisciplinary, focused on a theme, and it would be called a sustainability minor. And that would be addition to what you do. So those things are all being designed in concept, rolled out in pilot, and expanded in the pilots coming to announce to the faculty, who will be the community we want to reach in terms of preparing the educational mission in that area. The same is true in terms of research, by the way, which is a huge issue at USC. And here it is developing a number of, we'll call them comprehensive sustainability-focused themes of wellness, of design of communities, of the natural systems. And our committee in this area is comprised of research leaders, faculty, mostly, some students, so forth, but mostly faculty in this particular committee, because they're the ones who are directors and leaders of this research initiative, to come together with some broad themes and figuring out where they can get the funding, that's an issue, to actually conduct interdisciplinary, cross-university thematic studies on sustainability and its social impacts. We, in fact, have a new entity called the Center for Sustainability Studies and Solutions, I said studies, it's sustainability solutions, that is just itself piloting some new, we'll call them seed grants to groups of faculty who say, we want to take this challenge on. And we also want to then look for other, in a typical way, external funding for our research around these issues. Operations has a huge operations underway, which I know most people don't see because it's what goes on behind the scene at the university. But we already started down the path of solar. You'll see on the Galen Center, now it's a roof covered with solar panels. But solar is only one step in renewable energy, working very closely with the city for a very ambitious effort to bring renewable energy to the city, with USC as a major consumer of that. We're working on steps and laying out plans for transforming our transportation fleet. We're talking about something that may seem so simple, but changing out thousands of light bulbs, LED light bulbs on campus, which dramatically reduces our footprint. And by the way, over time, our cost also. So we're looking for that. We're looking for, there's some combined programs that are underway in terms of a trees initiative with the city, which creates a green canopy in what are known as urban hotspots, where they get very, very hot because we're in the city without a canopy, and trees provide that canopy as the temperature of LA warms. We're also doing it in other ways in terms of carbon offsets. So a lot going on to answer the question, is it social justice? Yes. What are the priorities? It's really to transform the university, but with specific goals. The largest contributor to US carbon footprint, really an interesting question. I don't think most people understand what that is, but we now have the information. We haven't collected it historically very long in a way that really illuminates that. Well, here's the answer, at least through 2019, because 2020, we know, has been an atypical year. But if we go back the year prior to COVID, what we know now, in retrospect and in looking at the information that's been very, very thoroughly reviewed, is that our procurement of electricity, major source of energy on campus, supplies electricity, was at about 38% of our carbon footprint. That is the result of generating electricity through fossil fuel generating facilities. Now, there's also renewable in that mix and hydro and so forth in that mix, but the fossil fuel generator ended up with being 38% of our footprint. What I think most people don't think about is our personal footprint. And I don't mean just personal, but what we do in our jobs and what we do individually. So let me give you some statistics here. The percentage of what we're counting as our emissions for which we want to neutralize, 12% are faculty and staff commuting, just coming to campus and commuting. 12.6% of students doing the same. The surprise for most people is just under 15% is a result of flying. Air travel, students and faculty. Professionally, this is only, and I understand this. We have a worldwide student body. We have faculty who travel worldwide and staff. And so it turns out we have a heavy lift in just our own behavior in travel and commuting. And then there's several other smaller, but I think there's 15% from using natural gas for heating throughout the campuses. So we have a handle on what the areas are. And the issue now is, how do we in fact make that neutral? One is it for EVs, that's the car side. If you're not driving a fossil fuel car, you can still drive. But we're also concerned about simply driving single occupancy vehicles because there's traffic congestion. But the extent to which we change the vehicles on the ground, we're also dealing with, we'll call it ambient air quality, which is the air we breathe. And in our neighborhood, that's not trivial. So the extent to which we can move from fossil fuel to electric vehicles in our fleet, in our cars, in our personal vehicles, we are actually improving the air quality for our community around us. And to the extent to which we can help people in our community do the same thing through programs that are being thought about, designed through an offsets, we are actually going to help them also contribute to our betterment, reducing their footprint and reducing our collective footprint. So these are the kind of issues that are really underway right now, being developed in concept. Some of them are being rolled out. I want to come back to the education one. It's going to be rolled out much more ambitiously this coming year than it was this past year. The research teams are coming together as they do. And, part of that is you have to be responsive to what the federal government, for instance, and foundations are willing to fund. But under the new Biden administration, there's a fair amount of optimism that there will be now attention to these issues for which USC will be competitive in applying for them. So that's very promising in that area. We are fortunate in terms of the national change of commitment to sustainability. Another question, how do you see sustainability affecting USC in 20 years? This is a tough one, because if you asked me 20 years ago what USC would be today, I would have been so far wrong. And I've been asked throughout my life on a kind of periodic basis, Dan, where do you want to be in 5 years? And I would always say something, because, you know, people ask, and typically your provost or your dean asks, and I would say something, and none of them have been right. But what I believe is happening is we are actually transforming the culture of USC and how we work together, and that will be enduring. And we've set some very, very ambitious goals that can't go away. I say can't, that's a statement. I know I'm asserting it. They can't go away, though, because if we don't do it, if we don't model behavior, if we don't teach everybody about their own responsibility and our collective ability to affect change, we have failed. So I'm going to say we're going to do it. And I'm not going to be here to 20 years to see it. President Folt may still be here, but don't bank on that, because presidents do turn over too. But the fact is, you're changing the culture of the institution, and those institutions, the institution is what carries on the mission. And we're not doing it alone. We're in a state that has the most ambitious state agenda in the United States and is known worldwide for being a leader. We're in a city where our mayor, Garcetti, is chair of something called C40, which is about 900 cities worldwide committed to sustainability. We're living it in our community. We're in a city with enormous needs of equity and justice. If we don't commit to doing right by those in need who are our neighbors, we're going to fail in sustainability. We won't be sustainable if we don't help. It's part of being sustainable as a community. So I'm guessing I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now as chair of the President's Working Group if I didn't think it was going to be enduring. That's my only answer. Another question I'm going to rephrase, first read it and then rephrase it. What steps does the Los Angeles community need to follow in order to make a difference in the planet's carbon footprint? We don't ask the question that way. We ask the question, what can we do with the city to help everyone change? So it's not what they need to follow. We are not setting a model for anybody. That would be presumptuous. Hopefully people do follow some of the things we're doing. I'm going to be honest about it. But that's not our goal. Our goal is to do good. And if you do good, others will want to emulate you. And when it comes to the city, as well as our neighbors, they're far too familiar with us telling them what they should do. That really isn't a way to get people to cooperate. We have to talk about how we cooperate, as we're doing with the mayor today. Carol Fulton and Mayor Garcetti are really very close in coordinating, both in our research, in themes and problems they identify. Now we go tell them what their problems are. So the solutions we come up and working with community aren't going to be simply, well, we all sat around and thought of the best possible solution. We know what it is because we studied it. We do have to have some expertise, but we have to be engaged in a conversation that addresses the needs of the people who say, look, I know you think I should have a new car, but really I'd like to get better food on my table. Or, you think I should insulate the attic, but I'm only renting and I'm not going to see the benefits from that. So we need to think of ways of, well, what would help you that also reduced your footprint, that made you feel better, and USC helped fund it? That's the question we have to ask. And with the city, let's coordinate. We are not going to do our energy transformation without the city, because they're the providers of our energy. We have to work with them. So the answer is what we do. So we're talking about, in research, kind of the pro-production of new knowledge. That's a heady academic term, but it's working together. And on education, it's to learn better how to do it. Back to the education. It was interesting that when the President's Working Group took this up as an issue, there was unanimous agreement that to understand the challenges today and sustainability as a major threat, one of the most powerful ways of conveying that message is through experiential learning. So we are recommending a very powerful shift or development of what is now at USC in a number of pockets, and I'll call it piecemeal because it's relevant to programs that exist, of experiential learning per se, to every student Every student at USC comes through not only with an introductory to sustainability, but with an experiential learning opportunity to engage in some way. It could be actually in research working on it, but it could be working with the community working on it. We haven't defined narrowly what that means. That's going to be a challenge for the next couple of years. But our vice provost of education is in the conversation. Across the university, experiential learning is really critical so we understand not only what the problems are, but how change can happen. So that's part of our educational mission. That's part of the 20-year change, actually. So it's about working with the community, but about modeling it ourselves and being collaborative through our teaching and experiential learning. I'm looking at these questions. I don't want to skip any. Oh, a big one I'm always asked, honestly, is how can students get involved with our sustainability efforts at USC? I mean, we do have a very large student population. We have, first of all, on the President's Working Group, the undergraduate sustainability organizations and leadership is on the President's Working Group and in our committees, as well as a graduate representative who's on it and programs in it. So it's not that students aren't represented, but we're talking about representation on a small committee relative to the size. It's through a host of things that are emerging, which is the research involves students when the faculty take it up. That's a natural process, but just more opportunities to do that. And for students, it was the student initiative over the last 3 years on raising the question, to what extent should USC as an investor with our endowment be investing in fossil fuels, that had an enormous impact on the decision made by the Board of Trustees, this is a couple of months ago, to what is called in the common conversation to divest of fossil fuels. Students had an impact through mobilizing. And it started, I think, maybe 4 years ago with 10, and it evolved into hundreds. They were organized. They actually visited with the investment committee of the USC board, ultimately in a conversation along the way. And the board, of course, as good stewards of our endowment, as good citizens of our university, as resonating to the themes themselves, made this commitment. So it's pretty significant. So students have an impact on the educational mission. This is evolving in terms of experiential learning and through the normal process of students and faculty engaging in programs and disciplines. It's not coming from the top. It is not, I want to repeat, this does not start at the top. This starts with students, faculty, staff, recognizing and saying, hey, have you thought about? So there's something that is going to be launched for Earth Day this week. It's going to be on the program. It's going to be an Arts Initiative Collective, which was brainchild of some students, went to some faculty, came to the President's Working Group for a little bit of support to find students and offer them a small stipend. It really was another one of these pilots to say, well, if you're in performance or music or literature or art, is there something you're doing already, because it's short term, that you want to present as part of our Earth Day presentation? And you will see that on Earth Day. I'm sorry I don't have the web link, I apologize. But you can go under the USC Sustainability Office, the green USC link, and it's listed there. So that's another way of saying this is about students' concern. And as students will have to mobilize, voice. That's how we make a difference. And I'm always trying to persuade students, I do myself, which is, I know you're very busy, we're all very busy, so it's above and beyond the call of duty. Just as, by the way, all the faculty and staff and students who are working with the President's Working Group. This is a voluntary organization. We are not on the organizational chart of the university. We don't have a budget. We report to the president, but obviously that spreads out across the university. And we then help endorse things that people want to do in this area. And that's what we'll continue to be doing next year as we go forward. This is as a chair of the President's Working Group Committee on Sustainability, what steps is the university taking that you find most exciting and impactful? Well, I've talked about most of them. But I think the one I want to come back to really goes back to the cultural change issue of our university, the organizational dynamic and cultural change. The committee that President Folt convened that brought together education, research, and operations was totally new, wholly new to my experiences 20 years at USC. I didn't mention I was a dean of the Price School when I first arrived here for a number of years. So I know from the dean's point of view, from a faculty's point of view, working with students' point of view, knowing the university maybe better than most because I was a dean. Committees like this haven't been established that had real teeth, whose recommendations are being implemented. This is unusual. And I just told you we don't have a budget. What we have is communications, coordination, collaboration. That's the cultural future. We're not going to buy our way out of the challenges of sustainability. We're going to work together to get out of them. And we're not going to be creating 100 new administrative organizations to do the work. We're going to say, what we really want to do is change the culture. So we work together on these, some leadership, some resources, but think about transforming how we interact. That's the cultural change. And I think that singularly is the most important thing I see happening. The specifics are terribly important. But if you add about institutional change is really at the heart of what President Folt is asking of us. And people are stepping up to. I'm thinking now, I'm watching the clock, but also thinking of questions I didn't mention before I go on. Let me look at the list because I have a list of them. How is the university considering social justice and sustainability plan? As I mentioned, it's part of every committee. A research committee talks about where this comes in. We have a new officer of inclusion and diversity, Christopher Manning, has arrived, and he is playing a part in the president's working group. And we have DEI already represented in the working group, and it's been a very important representation because our DEI committee went out and actually interviewed groups of students, staff, faculty, alumni about how to think about where do we bring these two things together. Not everybody has seen or today sees that sustainability, as we understand it at USC, really dovetails with equity and justice as being expected by those who have felt the onus of not being equitable and justice in the past. And our answer is, that's true. A lot of things, you can study the climactic changes without affecting equity and justice. But if you're going to ask yourself, which kinds of problems do you want to solve that affect people? We're calling signature level area research and classes, those that really focus directly on the interface of sustainability, equity, and justice. So that's what we're as our recommendations, but we're also trying to encourage that right now. I'm seeing it evolve in research and in the, as I mentioned, the pilot programs in teaching. We'll emphasize that. We'll give, recognition to those kinds of efforts. Two of the 6 classes that were actually authorized with the pilot are in this signature zone area. So now the issues come up in the president's working group, and everyone who I've talked with about the equity and justice say talk is cheap. And that comment I take very seriously because I've been through this for the last, I won't tell you how many decades, where everybody's talked about environment, economics, and equity. And I've seen over my own career that environment and economics come together. We call it a cap and trade policy and air emissions, but a lot of other ways. That environment and equity get together talking about it. Sometimes business and equity get together in terms of their behavior, but all 3 of them coming together has not been realized nearly to the extent to which we're hoped about in decades past. All I can say is that we are renewing the commitment at USC, and it's going to be up to you, not just me, but up to you and all listening, staff, faculty, students, and those that follow, to demand it. Why? Because it doesn't come easily. Equity and justice problems, the inequity in income in our society is enormous. The inequity in resources is enormous. And we're saying, okay, we understand that, but part of the problem is to make sure that the future isn't worse. off because of climate change. So we want to solve the problems of climate change and equity and justice simultaneously, because otherwise we may be overwhelmed with the adverse effect of climate change alone, and only making the inequities greater. So that really is, I think, a value proposition that's coming forward from the faculty, students, and staff, reflecting the values of our president and many others who are familiar with USC and committed to making it a model university in sustainability. I don't know if other questions have come up in this. I see a note on my chat. Maybe I can pull this up. No, not. So there are no other questions that are coming in here yet. So I think I may need to bring it to a close. I want to repeat very quickly before I finish off. 20 years, I think I've answered all the questions posed. And I just want to actually thank you for tuning in, and thank Price for giving me the opportunity to share what's going on at the level of the university today. And it's a ray of hope in what, for many, coming through a year of COVID, a year of rancorous politics, worried about the impacts of climate change. It's a hopefully a ray of hope that the university has a role in making the changes that will make a difference. Okay, thank you again.